Well, good morning. It is a good morning. It is a good day. It's a beautiful day, and I'm not necessarily talking about the weather or anything like that. I'm thinking more along the lines of what the psalmist calls the beauty of holiness, worshiping God, being together with God's people. I don't know that we often use the term beauty or beautiful to describe that, but I believe it's appropriate. Now, at the same time, anytime there's any moisture falling from the sky in western Oklahoma, correct me if I'm right or if I'm wrong, it's beautiful outside. All right? I think we all can agree there as well. It is good to be here today. It's good to see you. Good to have each of you here this morning. I'm excited. Hope you are. That Hunter is with us for, I guess we could say this is his official first Sunday gathering, however you want to describe that. That's an extra good thing today. And then it's already been announced, but just a quick reminder about the family get-together, family night tonight after the evening service. That is intended for anybody that is roughly college age all the way down. So from 1 year, a kid that's 1 to a kid that's 25. We can still use kid there, okay? But that'll be in the Family Center or Nagel's or whatever you call it, over that direction, hopefully immediately after our evening service. If you can join us for both, that would be great as well. Tonight, we're going to be looking and discussing the security of love in our lesson tonight. Hope you can be there if you can. Before we get into our study for this morning, would you join me in prayer? Let's pray together. Almighty God, the God of heaven and earth, the God of our fathers, the God who has blessed us with another day to get up and to be alive, to gather together, to sing and pray, to remember the death of your Son, and even now to open up your Word together. We're so thankful to you. And so it is our request this morning that you would be with us and help us as we open up your Word, as we think together, as we may challenge ourselves by considering your Word and how it applies in our hearts and to our lives. Be with us. It is our prayer in the authority of Jesus. Amen. We live in a world of tech, give me a second, of these little pocket boxes. Anybody have one of these this morning? If you've got one, hold it up. Anybody got this little black or white or purple or whatever color yours is? I only see like 2 of you, so maybe you're holding out on me. I don't know. But it is to state the obvious that for most, if not all of us in this room, every day of our lives now is some way connected to a screen, a device. I mean, you're looking at a screen up there. There's a screen over here. We've got screens in our pockets. We've got screens in the back. There are screens everywhere. I mean, you can't pump gas. That's how bad it is, without having a screen to look at. Or now there's a few, I haven't seen a lot of these, but have you seen them? You can't wash your hands, and I'm not going to get any more specific than that, but you can't wash your hands at a restaurant bathroom without a screen to look at. Anybody seen those? So that's just a basic fact of life right now, is that our world is filled with these boxes, these devices. And I'm going to use one this morning. I almost decided not to have PowerPoint today. The irony, I hope, isn't lost on you. I almost decided not to read any quotes from my phone, but I'm going to do it anyway. And part of it is to remind us that these devices, they're so dangerous because they're so good. They can help us to be so productive, even in spiritual matters. They can help us to accomplish so much in our jobs, and they can be useful in communication when it comes to relationships, especially if you've got family across the world. but they can also be our downfall. Here's just a few more bits of information for you this morning. On average, I'm pretty sure this is just in the United States. It might be in the Western world. I didn't double check that, so that's my fault. But on average, the last statistic I could find, the latest, said that we check our phones, these little guys, about 81,000 times each year. Or, if you translate that down, about every 4 minutes. Every 4 minutes. So that means that some of us, I'm not going to give you an exact number, but some of us are going to have the urge to check our phone. Now, you might be using your phone for a Bible this morning. That's a little different. But some of us are going to have the urge to check our phones, let's say about 4 times over the rest of this lesson. All right? We'll just put it at that, about that. Here's some more. What about these phrases? Electronic narcotic. You know that's a thing now that doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists are discussing. Face magnet. What about that one? Or this one that you might have heard before, portable babysitter. And then this says this, as anyone who knows a teen or tween can attest, media are among the most powerful forces in young people's lives today. 8 to 18-year-olds, that again, 8 to 18-year-olds spend more time with media than any other activity besides, and then they put in parentheses, maybe sleeping. And that adds up to an average of more than 7.5 hours every day. 7 days a week. Yes, it is safe to say this morning that we spend a lot of time in front of screens. We spend a lot of time, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever it is, TV, old school. We still got those, don't we? We spend a lot of time on devices. So this morning, as we continue, and I know this may seem like an odd thing to talk about. This is a family series. We started last Sunday that will go till Father's Day. But as we think about families and homes, as we think about marriages and parenting and children and all of that, it's important for us to think this morning biblically and then practically along that same way about the screens and the family. Let's start with Proverbs chapter 24 this morning. What are we filling our homes with? Or if you want to be more correct, I think I put it that way in the handout. With what are we filling up our family lives, our homes with? Proverbs chapter 24. We're going to read verses 3 and 4 this morning together. There are certainly times when the proverb writer deals with actual wealth and the workplace, and that may be the case here. We don't really have much to go on contextually to decide, but for our purposes this morning, we're at least going to read this metaphorically. Either way, there's 2 words that pop up in these 2 verses that are insightful. Solomon writes, by wisdom, there's word number 1, wisdom. So put that back into the question. Are we filling our homes with wisdom or something else? And by understanding, I think I said 2 words, it's actually 3, my miscount. Understanding, I did read this before I got up here, at least once. But by wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. So wisdom, understanding, and then the third one in verse 4, by knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Are we filling our homes with wisdom, understanding, knowledge? Have you heard the phrase that goes along the lines of a sea of information? Here's how I put it in my mind this morning is that sometimes if we're not careful, even in our families, what do we call them? Christian homes. Even in a Christian home, we might find that our children, and maybe it's because first the parents were drowning in a sea of information. We got plenty of that. The past generation or so, we have more written information, at least texted written information in blog posts and social media posts and text than any generation ever in history. But are we drowning in a sea of information because we're lacking the oxygenizing power? I'm not trying to be trite this morning at all. Of wisdom. How much information is in our home? How much wisdom from God is in our home? And then I couldn't find it. I don't know if it's been removed from the web or what, but have you seen the meme where the person's drowning, and instead of trying to rescue the person, what is everybody doing? They got those devices, and they're taking pictures, or they're just lost on their phone. Could it be that our children are drowning one way or another? Whether they're drowning because they're on their devices, or they're drowning in depression or discouragement or sexuality or whatever it is. And we as parents are too caught up in these things to even notice. Here we go. For the rest of our time together this morning, we're going to look at two specific items on the agenda that need some extra emphasis, some extra time this morning. And then we're going to back up in a way and look at the general idea. Let's start with this ugly beast called social media. I don't know that social is the right word, but it is a media. That word is certainly accurate. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I know there's a few in here, probably just Rod, but no, seriously, there's a few in here that aren't on social media, but most of us are, and at least if we aren't on there, as we say, we're at least familiar with it, and it probably affects our lives at this point in our culture more than we might even realize. But let's turn from Proverbs chapter 24, and let's look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. I do not know that this is an unfamiliar passage to us. Some of you could probably quote it, or at least paraphrase it. But it's one of those verses that there's good reason that we should be able to quote it. Let's read Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 together. Paul writes this. It's one of his final messages to this congregation. He says finally a few times. He was a lot like some preachers today. But he says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure. And that one's going to keep popping up, or at least it should throughout really this entire sermon. Whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if anything worthy of praise, think, better meditate on, dwell on, make this your default thought, or your default thoughts, these things. And you can take just this verse and then open up a social media app and just start thinking. Go to your timeline on Facebook, or go to your Instagram profile and just think, how much of this is pure? Or how much of this could Paul describe as lovely? And then don't get me started on the feed. Here are some aspects of social media that we need to give serious consideration to from this verse and many passages of Scripture that easily fit this idea. The first one is that of focus. Focus. Make sure we're in sync here. Have you noticed that? That everything, I'm speaking generically, but it's almost everything that gets posted on social media, or especially what gets lit up in the algorithms, what gets a lot of attention, a lot of discussion, a lot of likes and loves and shares. It's all focused on one of these things or something in the same grain. Physical appearance. And most people don't look in person like they do on their social media account, okay? We've got all these filters, and I mean, you can make anybody look pretty nice with the right filter, can't you? And it's become a parody now, man. People are making videos about it. And it's all about how you look. Or the tag on your clothes or your purse. Or it's about, do you have the latest iPhone? Or Android if you're weird. No, seriously. It's all about that. Or it's about material things. Look at the new car I just bought. Or we're moving in. Look at how nice our house is. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't share something that's exciting you. I'm not saying this morning that you're wrong. Well, Gantt said you better not post about the fact you're moving, or you might not want to do that for security purposes, but this is about focus. It's not this flat rule. But it's a question of what's the center? What am I really focused on? Or it's about success and status. And there's a certain height, a certain level I have to attain to. It's about focus. Along that same line, social media is also so often a comparison game. The most dangerous game. Because I see what they post, and it looks like they've got it all together. Her life, man, I wish my life was like that. I wish I had that much money to spend. I wish I did have that car in my garage. I wish I looked like her. Or, oh, if I could have the job he has. If I could just climb the ladder like he did, or she did. And let's be real this morning. Let's just say 9 times out of 10, probably 10 out of 10, they don't have it all together. Just their social media does. Nobody really has the life where everything is all together and problem-free, carefree, all the bills are paid, no worries. The kids are just the perfect angels. No, they're not. It's not real. But it's built within us, this battle, this war. I've got to be able to up you. And then we find ourselves doing this. And this one fits really both of these, so I'm just going to throw it in there. We find ourselves either broadcasting our successes or maybe the successes of our children. And again, I'm not saying you can't post about your kid. That's not the point. The point is, why are you posting about your kids? So we either broadcast our success, look how I've got it together, or sometimes, on the other hand, we vent our complaints. You ever seen somebody, maybe it's been you, but I'm just going to say somebody, have you ever seen somebody and it seemed like all they could post about on social media was some kind of complaint? Or maybe they were sharing a bit too much of their, what do we call it, dirty laundry? And if it's dirty, maybe you shouldn't broadcast it, right? And then lastly, under the idea of social media, this is somewhat of an old school term, so I'm going to date myself a bit maybe. But it's easy with social media. I mean, we can do this with our devices, period, but it's easy with social media, maybe than a lot of other aspects of our electronics, our screens, to veg out. And no, I am not saying that there's not a healthy place to chill, and maybe after a really long day at work and other activities, you get home and you just want to sit there or recline and not have to think and just relax. And it's easy then to start scrolling the feeds or whatever. I call it vegging out. And if you think about why we call it that, it might not be so fun. But here's where the real danger happens. I'm afraid sometimes today we are replacing our refuge from the world and our source of strength to endure another day with this pocket thing. Of course, that's a partial quote from Psalm 46, verse 1. You might look that one up sometime. Those are some thoughts about social media this morning. But now let's turn our attention to something even more serious, at least on the outset. Social media can be a good thing or it can be a monster. But here's the definite monster, and it's pornography. The biggest business in the world. You know that? And here's how it starts pretty often, not always. It starts with the soft stuff. And no, I'm not using that in the more technical definition this morning. I'm not even going to go there. But it usually starts with innocent, I might put that in quotes, innocent sources, like Instagram. I've mentioned before that it's gotten to the point I can't open up the search engine or the search on Instagram because it's filled. I mean, they're not clothless, but you know what I'm talking about if you've done it. But it starts with TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and Snapchat. And as parents, if you don't know what these are, and there are plenty more, maybe you should. That's often where it starts. And our brains, our imaginations, are a lot more powerful than we give them credit. Because it doesn't even have to go beyond that to be a problem. But it often does. Did you know that porn changes your brain, our brain's chemistry? It does something. I'm not going to share and read and post and put pictures of all the studies. That's for you or for maybe another lesson and more time. But there's a lot of science behind this. That it changes who you are. Changes how you think, how you feel, and how you look at other people, especially another person you find attractive. Changes how you think and feel and look at your spouse, at a sister or a brother. By the way, this is not just a male problem. There are a few more statistically males that are addicted to porn than females, but the numbers are actually getting pretty close these days. Men, as it's often been said, it's kind of become this cliche thing, or visually stimulated, but it's not just men. And if there's anything right now that is toward the top, maybe at the top of the list, that is destroying marriages and corrupting the minds of children, it's this. It'll destroy your marriage, it'll destroy your life before you know it. And did you know, because some of you are thinking, this is a bit much, Gantt. Did you know, and I don't know if I put it on the screen or not, I couldn't remember, right, it's not on there. But did you know that the average age that a person is introduced to pornography right now is about 9 or 10. 9 or 10. It is one of the most powerful addictions known to man. And here's part of the reason it is so powerful. Because let's say some drug, like methamphetamine or something, you got to go find it and then put it into your body. But the drugs that lead and cause the addiction to this, We walk around with them 24/7 inside us. And then the visual stimuli we walk around with in our pockets 24/7. Here's some passages to consider on this note. It is a biblical topic, just to keep in mind. One would be Psalm 101, verse 3. David's not talking about pornography or sexual things specifically, but it applies. David says to God, I've made this decision, this vow, I'm not going to set anything worthless before my eyes. Again, that one applies to everything we're saying today, but it really applies to this one. Or there's Job 31, verse 1, where Job says, I've made a covenant. By the way, there's a filtering program that's named itself after this verse. But he says, I made a covenant with these two, with my eyes. How can I look on young women? Or your version might say virgin, but you get the idea. How many of us have done that? And in our world, it's more, I've made a covenant with my eyes than when I'm at the grocery store or I'm on social media or I'm wherever. I'm going to avert my eyes. I'm going to look at that. I do like the ESV that says gaze in Job 31:1. It's a key idea, gaze. And then there's the more familiar text, Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, where Jesus says that it's possible to commit what he calls adultery in the heart by looking at someone with what he then calls, what's translated in the English Standard there as well, as lustful intent or covetous intent. It's one thing to look. It's one thing to look and find somebody attractive. Now again, if they don't have any clothes on, that's a whole different story, okay? But it's something else to keep gazing, and it's something else to go somewhere in your heart that you shouldn't be going with that person. So there's social media, and sometimes it's overlapped today with pornography. Biggest business in the world. Let's back up now. And you're probably thinking you're glad we're moving on. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We need to talk about it. We need to talk to our children about it. But I think it's probably good if it feels awkward. Let's think about some general ideas about devices in our home life, our family. Let's turn to Ephesians chapter 5. Let's read verses 15 and 16. I believe on the handout it has just verse 15. I'll have to talk to whoever made my handout about that one. But in Ephesians 5, verse 15 and 16, the Apostle Paul writes this: Look carefully then how you walk. For our discussion today, could we say, look carefully how you use your smartphone? Not as unwise, but as wise. The point today is not to throw away your smartphone. The point is more nuanced than that. And then verse 16, making the best use of the time. Literally redeeming, buying up all the precious time you can. Not that you can literally buy it. Why? Because the days are evil. On that note, let's put it into a question then. Let's just ask, is there a bigger potential, probable time waster in our time than screen time? Let's put this question out there. What is the first and or the last thing that you look at every day? What is it? For most people in our time today, especially if you're about 90 and under, you get that? It's this. Now, I get if you use it, a lot of us use them as alarms. That's one thing. If you roll over to hit snooze, maybe to turn it off. But should it really be the very last thing you look at before you lay your head down on the pillow at night? Now, of course, there's some medical issues that you might not be able to sleep if you do that, but there's some spiritual issues. Someone recently pointed out that we are addicted in the mornings to newness. We've got to see what's new. We're addicted to ego boosts. Let me see who liked my comments between last night and this morning. Let me see. And we try to avoid boredom and hardship. Maybe our days aren't so great. Maybe we're going through something. And so instead of before we even get out of bed or before we get very far out of bed, I got to have some time just to get away from it all. What's the first and the last thing you look at and you think about every day? And then there's this idea. Did you know that we are what we behold? What we spend our time looking at changes who we are. And that's true in a really deep, severe way with pornography. But it's true to other degrees with any screen time or anything that we look at, for that matter. And here's what's happened. We've created a frenzy. We already mentioned the need to check our phones every 4 minutes. We fight notification battles. Have you done that? Where, do I have the notifications turned on? Because then I'll see it, and I'll have to check it. Or do I turn the notifications off, but then, ever so often, I've got to open up the app now and see if I've got any notifications. You see how that works? That's just one example. We do that in a lot of different ways. And it creates this impatience within us. We didn't have a computer in our house until I was 11. And, are you getting impatient yet? And we had dial-up. Some of you don't even know what that is. But have you ever had your phone, or maybe it's your tablet or your computer, and you're trying to load a website, or you're trying to get Instagram to refresh, and it's not happening? And what that means is it's not happening within half a second or two. I mean, what would we do if all of us had to go back just to dial-up internet? What would that be like? You think we'd survive? I mean, some of us, we can't make it to the day when we've broken our phones and we're waiting for the next one to come in. I mean, come on, hurry up. Can't the FedEx guy get here any faster, right? And then we wonder why we're having trouble with anxiety and being impatient with our children, and why our kids are impatient and they want everything right now. And our attention spans are almost nothing. By the way, we've become an image-obsessed and image-driven culture. Have you noticed that? We can't read it anymore. We can't even hear it. We've got to see it. And if we can't see something, and if that something doesn't change pretty quickly, we get bored. What happens? And then lastly, I think about the effects of TV, of movies and shows, that if we're not careful, sometimes they are the oldest and best friend and teacher our kids ever have. But have you noticed the way they portray things? Like drinking. It looks really great. And you don't see the lives ruined. Every now and then you do. Or sex. That's just what you do when you're dating. I mean, who would ever dare to think that's reserved for only the person you're married to? And of course, you never see the destroyed hearts, the STDs, the multi-marriages and divorces. And then when it comes to the family, a healthy family that looks anything like a biblical family, nobody likes that. That's boring and old-fashioned and traditional and narrow-minded. And if you're in that, the dad's not happy, the mom is frustrated, the kids are in control. That's how it's portrayed. And yet the Bible tells us, as disciples of Jesus, to not be conformed to what? To the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And mind renewal, that takes time. Solving difficult life decisions and problems takes time. Reading a good book takes time. Oh, and I've got a pretty good one right here. Media. Let's close by thinking about some tips. These are mostly second opinions and first hesitations, so you can file them or toss them where you want. But tip number one is to have conversations with our kids about what they see and what they hear. We've already noted this to some degree, but the takeaway this morning is not necessarily to not have any devices in your house. It's that you have conversations about the content. And they're going to see it. Even if you manage to restrict it and keep them pure in your house, what happens when their buddy at school hands them their phone? It doesn't have a filter or a restrictive program on it. It's, oh, hey, look at her. What happens then? And then secondly, monitor and restrict. I think we need to be very careful about how early we give a phone to a kid. I don't know if we should be giving phones to kids while they're still kids at all. We've got to be very careful about whether a kid is allowed to have a TV or a tablet in their room that's just under their control. Monitor it, restrict it. And if you aren't familiar with ways to do that, there's plenty. And here's one of my rules, is if I tell you no, you can't watch something on Mama's iPad today, or right now, or it's time to turn it off, here's my rule of thumb. And maybe this should apply to adults too. But if you cry or you start to pitch a fit, then you don't get it for a long time. Because the number one child addiction is not necessarily porn, it's just phones. And then 3 and 4, 2 more tips to think about this morning. One is to take screen fast. Sunday afternoon is actually a really great time. You maybe don't have anything to do with work. You don't have anything to do except just relax and scroll social media or watch TV all afternoon. What if you didn't do that today? Take time away. Be intentional about it. And then the last one is use them, employ them as tools for the real world. And I'm not just talking about spiritual things. I mean, whether it's a hobby or your job or whatever. Because I promise you, there are a lot more exciting adventures to be had and more even fun and entertaining things to do than stare at a screen. The wonder boxes of our world. If you're going to use them to connect you to the real world. And then here's our final questions. I do mean final. Okay? Final questions this morning. Are we connected? We long to be connected. And most of the time what that means is we've got to always be connected to our phones. We're always connected. So if somebody texts me, somebody IMs me, I'm going to be responding right back. I'm connected to them. But the more we become connected, the more disconnected we become in real relationships. And then the question of mastering media or being mastered by me. And this last one. Is my home Jesus-centered? Or is it screen-centered? That's the bottom line this morning. And like I said last week, this lesson isn't your typical invitation song lesson. But you're invited today to come to Jesus, maybe for the first time, maybe for another time. But don't sing this song unless you're willing to surrender this to Jesus. Let's stand and sing together.